So the cupboard I want to put a shelf in is this one here, and this board here is only 12mm thick, so it doesn't give me a lot of strength for putting screws in through into this that might poke through from the other end. So a good way to get around that is to add some threaded inserts. So these ones get drilled in with a 9mm hole, then they just screw in like an ordinary screw through into this piece of wood. So I've drilled some M6 holes into there. Just screw them in until they're just starting to come through the holes and line up. So that's fine, so that's one side of the support for the shelf done. So next I want to drill some holes in for some anchors that are going to go in here. Okay, so that's level. And I just want to mark through these holes. And just make these holes a little bit more visible. So the next thing I need to do is try and determine if there's any studs in this wall. So we have a stud finder here. So I can see there's a stud going horizontally across there, and nothing for where I'm trying to drill. So I can see there's a stud there on the corner, and a stud along at the other end. So that means I'm going to have to use some kind of hollow wall anchor. So I'm going to use one of these, which is screw, gets put in with a hollow wall anchor tool. This particular one needs a 8mm hole. So next we just take the hollow wall anchor tool and put that in the hole, and then just squeeze that, and then we can just remove the screw for that one. And for the other hole, it's going to be a little bit awkward, so I try to give myself as much room as possible for doing that, so I'd only get into about there I think, which not ideal. So to get into this one, I'm going to use a little screw anchor like that just screws into the plasterboard. So you have a tool set here, and we just try and hammer that in just a little bit. So we just try and screw that one in just tight and no more, otherwise it starts to break the plasterboard. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is to take the other side of the batten for the shelf, and we will screw So there are various angle measurers you can use to be able to cut out a shelf. This is one of them. Anyway, I'll give you a copy of the angle. You can then transfer to a piece of cardboard, so then you can just cut out that piece of cardboard, and you can add additional bits of paper, then you can transfer that to a piece of wood to cut out. So then we can cut out the shelf, have a nice white finish there, and just a particle board on the other sides. And hopefully it should now fit. The reason why we're putting the shelf in here was that I wanted to have some way of hanging up a steam cleaner in the closet so that it wouldn't be sitting with a damp pad on the floor. So what I've got is some hook, and I can use that to screw in underneath. Obviously these won't do too well against the shelf because they would just come straight through, so I need to modify this somehow to be able to screw these in. So to make it easier to screw into the shelf, I don't want to be sitting under here screwing in, so I'll just mark where the bracket can't go, so it can't go beyond that this way and beyond there. So I've got two of these bits that I use for the shelf edging, and what I'm going to do is screw these onto here, and the hook is just going to go through there, so it's obviously going to go into the shelf just a little bit. So what I need to do is I've pre-drilled these for the size of that screw, and that'll stop this wood from actually splitting once I tighten these big screws in. So I was painting these the similar kind of colour to what the shelf is, and a good way to do that, reuse some IKEA packaging, put the blocks mounted on some blue tack, and we can just spray around them, and that way it just keeps it away from the edge there. And so that any weight that's hanging down on the underside of this shelf won't pull any screws out of this, because it's only something like 16 thick. Then I'll put that up there, screw that on, and there are 6 countersunk holes in there already, and then that'll spread the load when being screwed into the shelf up there. So what I need to do next is to put this with the hooks lining up roughly with that, and I'll give it a little bit of a space there to make it easier to get the shelf in and out. So it's about 10 centimetres, so I've got some 25mm screws, and that's 12, so they're going to go into this about 13mm, and it's about 16mm thick, so that's good. So I've got a small drill bit that's going to fit through these pilot holes, and I'll just check that the drill bit isn't wobbling, because when you have these small ones sometimes they have a tendency to wobble when the jaws clamping onto this aren't quite straight in. These ones here. So I'm just going to mark that just ever so slightly. Okay. Next I need to drill a slightly bigger hole into these ones. I would have used a collar on the drill, but I can't find where they actually are, so let's just use a bit of tape instead. And then we'll just do the same thing with the 6 screws. If you haven't used an impact driver before compared to a drill, these are really good, have a bit more torque, and also the screw driver has a little bit less tendency to cam out. So if you ever use one of these, you'll notice that when it gets to its final position, then it's got a tendency for the screw bit just to jump out of the screw head. So really worth it. And again, when you're doing something like that, you can't screw that straight into a piece of wood. You've got to drill a pilot hole first. So I usually just measure with a pair of calipers the thickness of the body there, and then that's the size of drill bit that I'd use. And then it still gives plenty of space for the threads here to bite into the wood and not be too loose. So by doing that pilot hole first, it means I can just screw this in. So the screw has to be accessible from the front. And I'll risk it one more turn. Oh, that's good. And I'll do this one more turn as well. So that'll keep those screw threads very tight in there, and it hasn't come through. So let's see how this shelf fits in now. Cool. And that works perfectly. Cheerio.